Mustafa Barghouti. He is the brother, I believe,
Marwan
Barghouti, who has been in Israeli prison for almost 20 years now, I think.
Often referred to as the Mandela of Palestinians, right? In the sense of like, he's quite a popular leader who has been imprisoned really for that, for in many ways for that reason by the Israelis. And
here he is talking to an Al Jazeera news presenter about whether the Israel will change direction now after having essentially assassinated these aid workers.
What do you make of the world reaction to it so far? Do you feel that this is a point, this is a turning point?
No, and I'm so shocked that countries like Australia, with all due respect, Australia, Britain, Poland, did not even condemn the attack. For God's sake, these are their citizens. They didn't dare to condemn the attack of Israel. And the United States representatives, Mr. Blinken, he had the guts to say when he was discussing this matter that we must make sure that Israel has the ability to defend itself. Israel is not defending itself. Israel is attacking Palestinians and attacking internationals. And the spokesperson of the National Security Council also had the American had the guts to say that we don't have proofs that it was intentional. So they're already taking sides and they are already trying to cover up for Israel. And what we see here is a horrible double standard. Compare that with their behavior when Israel claimed, without proving, that some UNRWA workers cooperated with Hamas, and immediately all these countries shut off funding of UNRWA. Come on, this is the most clear proof of a very bad double standard that is followed by many Western governments. And by doing so, they are encouraging Israel to commit these crimes and encouraging Israel to be above the law and above international law.
This is on the same day or around the same 24-hour period that we also saw Israel targeting a diplomatic mission in Syria, Iran's diplomatic mission, also taking moves to ban Al Jazeera within Israel, stifling free speech, a cornerstone of democracy. It seems that it is ramping up these efforts to push the international community, and yet we're still not hearing anything to stop it. What is the dangers of it acting with such impunity?
The very big danger and immediate danger is that they will conduct this terrible massacre in Rafah. And they can do it, and they will do it, unless something happens immediately to impose sanctions on Israel. And that would mean the largest massacre in modern history. The other thing is that they will continue to try to push Palestinians out of Gaza into Sinai. And this would be the worst act of ethnic cleansing. There has to be immediate action, and the only thing that will stop Israel is sanctions. Sanctions have to be imposed on Israel, including preventing supplies of military equipment and military, like Canada did, and also taking other sanctions on Israel. Look, Israel is now not only killing people, but also it is violating the United Nations Security Council resolution. It is violating the rulings of the International Court of Justice. They don't care. I think somebody should check the sanity of people like Netanyahu and his crowd. I mean, they're going totally out of control. And I trust the people. I so appreciate the people who are demonstrating every day, pressuring their governments. And that's what we need, more pressure on governments to immediately take actions to sanction Israel, to force it to stop this atrocity and this genocide.
Yes, the fact that he mentioned sanctions there are really important to me because we are well past ceasefire now.
Or even just lack of aid.
Yes. And I think, of course, well-meaning people are talking about ceasefire. But again, I do think that the procedural wartime language of ceasefire actually does a lot of work to lie about this situation, which is that this is not a Rafah offensive. It's exactly what Barghouti said there. It will be a mass slaughter, one of the worst in modern history, unprecedented in that instance. This is not an Israel-Hamas war. It is a genocide one-sided by Israel imposing violence upon a population where they have complete control over it, where they're killing hospital workers because they're saving Palestinians, killing aid workers because they're feeding Palestinians. So, we are well past a ceasefire, right? Because the ceasefire, as he says there, the resolution did pass the United Nations Security Council with the U.S. abstaining. The U.S. then went on in front of the podium, in front of the White House press corps, and said, "Well, we don't see this as binding, even though it's quite clear the Security Council resolutions are binding." But we're past that point. We now need to begin thinking about isolating Israel. I think we should have done that a long time ago. But through sanctions, through imposing them on this out of control rogue state, that we see Netanyahu was grinning as he announced that, and didn't even decide to say, it was a Hamas rocket. He just was like, yeah, but basically crap happens, was what he said as he grinned into the camera. So that is where we need to reorient this conversation at this point.
And in addition to just sort of the insanity of $18 billion worth of F-15s being transferred to Israel, it feels, when you all those 2,000 pound bombs that were transferred last week, maybe it was at the beginning of this week, was it on Monday? Right. That there is a sense that the U.S. is basically saying to Israel, if you want to widen this conflict, that's one of the things that I think I get even more worried about as well, is that there is either they are getting these weapons because they do intend to go into Rafah. They know what it's going to look like to the rest of the world. In particular, it is going to make it almost impossible for groups like Hezbollah or other Iranian proxies, or frankly, in the streets in Jordan, to just sit there and watch this wholesale slaughter and not react. And one wonders if these other bombs and these other airplanes, right, because they're not using jets in Gaza, aren't there to either A, involve in some offensive war, you get the sense of like the neocons who would say, like, well, we're there, let's just do the whole job, let's just do the whole region, or that they are preparing for an offensive on Gaza, on Rafah, that is going to be so bloody and murderous that they expect a certain amount of blowback. Either way, it's a terrifying idea. And the U.S. is going to provide that weaponry, which as some type of insurance blanket for them is grotesque.
I saw, to your point, Sam, Trita Parsi made this point that, the Iran, it seemed like Iran and the United States were having conversations behind the scenes in the lead up to this incredibly provocative attack on the embassy in Syria, the Iranian embassy that Israel did, because there were the Iraqi militias were kind of acting in that proxy manner and were going after the United States, but there had been no attacks over the last 6 weeks. So that indicates that the U.S. was engaging in diplomatic talks with Iran behind the scenes, and Israel didn't notify the U.S. that it was bombing this Iranian embassy. So this is Netanyahu saying, we don't really care about your diplomacy. We're going to make tension. We're going to escalate tensions with Iran regardless to draw you in, even as you're attempting to avoid that very reality. How is Biden allowing this total psychopath? Barghouti is right there. Check this guy's mental sanity. We are in a situation where he is completely out of control. This is historic, the level of impunity that he is and arrogance that he is operating with. Yep. And just from an optics perspective, Biden looks incredibly weak.
Well, Biden has not done anything. Even if you consider rhetoric to be something, has done nothing in any way that would indicate to Netanyahu that there's anything that he can do that would be problematic from Biden's perspective. There may be this notion behind the scenes where they're going like, well, if you're going to do this, you're going to need to, it's going to be hard and we're going to have to massage this or massage that. Meanwhile, in 4 states yesterday, there were primaries, and uncommitted was available in Connecticut and Rhode Island as an option. I think it was uninstructed in Wisconsin.
Yep.
In New York, what activists were doing was, and anybody, I mean, frankly, anybody who was interested in sending a message, just picking up your ballot and leaving it blank and then having it scanned. Now, that is a cumbersome thing, and it's not like the voting workers were there, sort of saying that's, this is how you do this and that. So I haven't seen the numbers there, and it's going to be hard to sort of like suss out. But the point is that there has been enough activism that at least the White House seems to be upset about it, but not necessarily enough for there to be changes. It felt like a week ago that maybe we were seeing sort of a rebellion in the Senate, and perhaps one that was growing. It seems to, I haven't heard as much about that in the past couple of days. People are piling on Brian Schatz when he put out a tweet saying, it's a real shame of what happened and nobody who's giving out food should be attacked, as opposed to like, all in the passive sense, like, hey, there was someone who's doing the attacking. It's true, aid workers should not be attacked. But then there's another cohort of people who you should say to, hey, you, Israel, should not be attacking aid workers. In fact, you shouldn't be attacking anyone at this point. You've done enough killing and damage. But last night, the Biden White House was having a dinner, I guess, to celebrate the end of, or I don't know if it was the end of Ramadan. I don't think that ends for another couple of days.
It was Arab American
Iftar as well. Celebrating Iftar is one of the commemorative.
And also Arab American History Day or month, I believe. They had put out they put out a statement on this on April 1st, and I had to double check that it was not an April Fool's joke.
And at the dinner turned out to be more of like a I don't know what you would call it, a meeting. But Thayer
I think because, the activists didn't want to be eating when people are experiencing famine in Gaza. They didn't like that symbolism. Go on.
Exactly. And Dr. Thayer Ahmed, who we had on this program about a month and a half ago, on February 14th, I think it was. He's from Chicago, but if you'll remember, he had spent 3 weeks, a couple of weeks earlier, in Khan Yunis, working at the hospital there. And just before it was actually assaulted by the Israelis, or I think the Israeli assault happened maybe on the 15th or 16th of February. And we had just spoken to him. He wasn't, what he witnessed there was horrific, obviously. He was at he was invited to the dinner. And let's let him tell his story on CNN from last night with Caitlin Collins.
Officials had planned an iftar dinner at the White House tonight, an event to break the daily fast with Muslim Americans during Ramadan. But sources tell CNN that so many of them declined the invitation, uncomfortable with the idea of having a celebratory meal as people in Gaza are starving. That means the White House scaled it back to just be a policy meeting, but even that did not go as planned for the White House. One Palestinian American, who is an emergency medicine physician and volunteered in Gaza earlier this year, walked out of that meeting. That doctor, Dr. Thayer Ahmed, joins me now. And Dr. Ahmed, it's great to have you here. Can you just start by telling me what happened when you went to the White House tonight? What was said inside that room?
Well, yeah, I thank you for having me. I think, we had shown up to this meeting really concerned about what was taking place in the Gaza Strip, and I'm glad that you mentioned that we were, insisting that there not be any food there. It made no sense for us to sort of break bread while talking about a famine taking place. We had shown up, and the president and the vice president, the national security advisor are in the room, and it was very brief comments by the president saying he wants to hear from us and he wants to listen to us. And so I spoke first, and I let him know that I am from a community that's reeling. We are grieving. Our heart is broken for what's been taking place over the last 6 months. And that the rhetoric that has been coming out of the Biden administration, that's been coming out of the White House, it's frustrated a lot of people, especially people who are Palestinian Americans, Muslim Americans, Arab Americans. We are not satisfied with what has taken place. There has been no concrete steps. But keep in mind, we're very concerned about the people that are over in the Gaza Strip, that are in Palestine right now, who are not just starving, but are facing the threat of a looming Rafah invasion. And so I was able to share that with the president and let him know that out of respect for my community, out of respect for all of the people who have suffered and who have been killed in the process, I need to walk out of the meeting. And I want to walk out with decision makers and let them know what it feels like for somebody to say something and then walk away from them and not hear them out and not hear their response.
Wow. I mean, how did President Biden respond to that?
There wasn't a lot of response. He actually said that he understood, and I walked away. And I think, for me, just like many of the other Palestinian Americans and Palestinians, or as I mentioned, many of the people who are interested in what's going on, we're panicking. I mean, we're talking about 1.7 million people are in Rafah right now. And we heard that there was a UN security resolution that had passed and the U.S. abstained. And we were thrilled about this. But only moments later to have that sort of joy ripped from us when our own White House is saying, oh, it's a non-binding resolution. They're undermining the very UN Security Council resolution that's calling for a ceasefire. Okay, well, then let's think about what happens next. Oh, then we hear that there's an arms transfer that's going to take place. And we know that included in these arms transfers are these 2,000-pound bombs that are leveling neighborhoods. I mean, I was in Gaza in January. I saw the devastation of Khan Yunis. I saw Deir al-Balah. I mean, these bombs are wreaking havoc, and people are fleeing to the south, to Rafah, the southern edge of Gaza, bordering up against Egypt. And we're transferring more bombs, more bullets, more fighter jets. What's going to happen to those people in Rafah? I mean, I'm telling you that every single humanitarian aid organization, every single person invested in what's taking place and watching, we are trying to scream at the top of our lungs, please, we cannot allow a ground invasion to take place. We need food to be able to enter and it to be distributed safely. And I'm glad you mentioned the tragic loss of the World Central Kitchen workers who were a part of an approved route. I mean, these are people who are coordinating and just trying to deliver food to hungry people, and they're assassinated in the process. And so there is so much wrong in Gaza.
And it sounds like you don't think that the White House is hearing you. Were you the only Palestinian in that room tonight?
Yeah, I was the only Palestinian American in that room. I think that there were plenty of people who probably declined, but I know that there are many people who I had mentioned who should be present there, who for whatever reason weren't given the invite. And it's important to mention, I'm a humanitarian physician. I go to the Gaza Strip. I am a Palestinian American, but I'm not an organizer. I'm not a leader of any local community here. I'm not a part of any organization that I'm the president of. And so even me being selected to be invited to this place, it's not really representative of the diverse community that makes up the Palestinian diaspora. It's not representative of them.
And he didn't even mention how he apparently handed Biden, when walking out, a letter from an 8-year-old girl pleading for him, not an 8-year-old Palestinian girl in Gaza, not to invade Rafah, which is an incredible act of protest. I mean, he was so wonderful when you interviewed him, Sam, here, and spoke with such clarity, let alone his bravery of doing this work in the Gaza Strip. But this was a really important action that he took here as well.
Yeah, folks, we'll put a link to his February 14th interview on this program. I think he had been on Democracy Now! The day before, too. It's worth watching both those, frankly, to get a sense of what he saw on the ground. And again, that was a month and a half ago.
Yeah.
Well, he was there in January, and the devastation is, Al-Shifa Hospital, as you've probably seen the images, has been completely obliterated, and in the most sort of grotesque and brutal way. go and check those interviews out. I would imagine we're going to see increasingly greater protests in this country that hopefully would put some pressure on maybe individual lawmakers who could then, sort of begin to pressure, apply pressure on the administration. I think I saw some polling in Wisconsin that something like literally like 99%, maybe it was 100% of people under the age of 30 wanted the Biden administration to restrain Israel. I mean, that's where we're at right now.